The night they dragged her out of the feast hall. No one moved to stop them. 500 wolves sat at long tables groaning with roasted meats and spiced wine, chandeliers blazing like captured stars overhead, and not one of them rose from their seat as the guards closed their hands around her arms and pulled her toward the doors. She did not scream. She had learned long ago that screaming only made it worse. She simply looked straight ahead, chin up, jaw set, and let them take her into the cold. The snow hit her like a wall. It was the kind of cold that reached inside your chest and squeezed, the kind that stole the air from your lungs before you could decide whether to fight for it. She was wearing the dress Lady Vanthorne had chosen for her. Thin green silk, no sleeves, nothing between her skin and the winter night but the barest whisper of fabric. And the moment the great doors slammed shut behind her, the cold moved in like it had been waiting. She stood on the palace steps for a moment, just breathing. Then she sat down in the snow because her legs gave out. Her name was Aella of House Vance, though no one here knew that. To the court of Valdoria, she was simply Lady Vanthorne's ward, an orphan taken in out of charity, given food and shelter in exchange for, well, in exchange for things she had learned not to name because naming them gave them too much weight, and she could not afford to carry anything heavier right now. Right now, she needed to think. The feast had been in honor of the Alpha King's 31st year, 31st. She had counted the days for 2 years running. Everyone knew the prophecy. A seer had come to the old king's court before Caius Blackmere was born, had spoken over his cradle in a voice that shook the walls, and the words had been passed down through every generation since. The Blackmere line would end with him unless he found his fated mate before his 31st winter solstice. The solstice was in 3 days. She had come to the feast because Lady Vanthorne had commanded it. She had stood along the far wall with the other wards and lesser guests, invisible as furniture, watching the great wolves of Valdoria drink and laugh and negotiate alliances through gritted smiles. She had been fine. She had been perfectly fine, invisible in the way she had perfected over 15 years of practice, right up until the moment the Alpha King had walked into the hall. She had felt him before she saw him. A prickling sensation at the back of her neck, like fingertips trailing across her skin. A heat that had nothing to do with the roaring hearth fires. She had turned, almost against her will, and found him standing in the great archway, and the world had simply stopped. He was carved from shadow and silver. That was the only way she could describe it later, when she had words again. Features sharp enough to cut, dark hair falling across his forehead, eyes the pale gold of a winter moon scanning the hall with the careful patience of a predator who had already identified every exit and every threat before anyone else had registered his presence. He wore black leather and carried no visible weapon, which somehow made him more dangerous, not less. He moved like every step was deliberate, like nothing he did was ever accidental. His eyes had found hers across 500 people. She did not know how. She was standing in the darkest corner of the hall, wearing a borrowed dress, doing everything she had learned to do to avoid being seen. But his gaze had cut through every person between them like they were made of smoke, and when it landed on her, she felt it in her chest, like a bell being struck. His nostrils had flared. She had turned away, fast, heart hammering. She had pressed herself back against the stone wall and told herself it was nothing. It was coincidence. Great alphas looked at everyone like that. It was simply a matter of proximity and overactive nerves. And then Lady Vanthorne had appeared at her elbow like a cold shadow. The words had been quiet, almost pleasant, but the grip on her arm had been anything but. "You are embarrassing me," her guardian had said, standing there gaping like a village fool. "If you cannot conduct yourself with appropriate invisibility, you will wait outside." And then the guards had come. She had not argued. Arguing with Lady Vanthorne in public was a lesson she had learned exactly once, at 14, and the aftermath had taken 3 weeks to heal. So she had let them take her, chin up, eyes forward. And now she was sitting in the snow outside the Alpha King's feast hall in a silk dress that was doing absolutely nothing for her. And she was so cold she could no longer feel her hands. She pressed them between her knees and tried to calculate. She could not go back inside without Lady Vanthorne's permission. She could not go around to the servants' entrance because the wards used the same entrance as the guests. A deliberate humiliation she had always suspected was intentional. She had no cloak. She had no money. She had nowhere to go in this city except back to the Vanthorne apartments in the East Wing, and those were locked from the outside when Lady Vanthorne was not in them. The cold was getting worse. She was starting to shake. Deep bone-level tremors she could not stop. And she knew, with the flat clarity of someone who has been cold before, that this was the beginning of something serious. She had maybe an hour before her body started making decisions for her. She needed to move. She needed to find warmth. She needed to think of something she had not thought of yet. She was still thinking when the doors behind her opened. The warmth from the hall rolled over her like a wave, and she did not turn around, because turning around would mean acknowledging whoever it was, and she was too cold and too tired and too humiliated to perform calm for anyone right now. Then a cloak settled over her shoulders, heavy, black, lined with something soft that smelled like pine resin, and something darker underneath. Something she had no name for. Something that made the prickling sensation at the back of her neck flare so suddenly that she gasped. She turned. He was crouching behind her in the snow, balanced easily on his heels, those pale gold eyes level with hers. This close, she could see that they were not actually pale. There was fire in them, deep and banked, burning slow and absolute. He was looking at her the way she had been told no one would ever look at her. Like she was something that mattered. Like she was something that needed protecting. Like she was something he had been looking for. She said nothing. Her voice had gone somewhere without her permission. He said, very quietly, "How long have you been out here?" She considered lying. She was good at lying. She had been good at it since she was 7 years old, and lying had been the only armor between herself and consequences she could not afford. But something about the way he was looking at her made the lie wither before it could form. "Long enough," she said. His jaw tightened. Just slightly, just enough to tell her that the answer had cost him something. "Come inside," he said. "I cannot," she said. "My guardian? Your guardian," he said, and his voice dropped to something so cold it made the winter air seem warm by comparison. "Has been escorted from my hall." She stared at him. "I am the Alpha King of Valdoria," he said, as if this required clarification. "What happens in my hall is my concern. What happens to people in my hall is my concern." He paused, and then, with a careful deliberateness that she would think about for a long time afterward, "What happens to you is my concern." The snow continued to fall between them, soft and indifferent. She said, "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "I intend to correct that." His name was Caius Blackmere, and she knew his story the way everyone in Valdoria knew it. The king without a mate, the prophecy counting down, the throne that would die with him if he failed. She knew it the way you know a cautionary tale. Something that happens to people in stories, not people who crouch in snow outside feast halls and hand you their cloak like it is the most natural thing in the world. She let him help her up, not because she was weak, because her legs had genuinely stopped working from the cold, and the only alternative was refusing out of pride and then sliding back down into the snow, which would have been deeply undignified. She let him help her up, and the moment his hand closed around her arm, the heat that rolled through her was so sudden and so absolute that she made a sound, just a small sound, barely anything, but he heard it. His hand tightened, not painfully, like an anchor finding purchase. They went inside. She woke the next morning in a room she did not recognize. Not a servant's room. She knew servants' rooms, the narrow beds and thin blankets and walls that let in every sound from the corridor. This room had high ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows draped in silver damask, and a bed the size of a small country. And she was warm, genuinely warm, for the first time in so long that the sensation was almost alarming. She lay still for a moment, cataloging exits the way she always did when she woke somewhere unfamiliar. 2 windows, both overlooking an inner courtyard. 1 door, standing slightly open, light falling through the gap. A fireplace along the far wall, burning low but steady. A crystal pitcher of water on the nightstand. No one was watching her. She sat up carefully. The green silk dress was gone. Someone had dressed her in a nightgown of soft linen, white, clean, smelling of cedar and something floral she could not identify. Her hands were wrapped in warm cloths. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. Someone had cared for her while she slept, with an efficiency and gentleness that made her chest hurt in a way she did not know how to categorize. "You're awake." She turned. A woman stood in the doorway. Older, silver hair coiled precisely at the top of her head, wearing deep blue robes, face weathered and kind despite its sharp angles. She carried a tray with bread and something warm and steaming, and she moved across the room with the unhurried competence of someone who had done this 10,000 times before. "I am Thessaly," the woman said. "Royal healer. You were showing signs of exposure when the king brought you in. Your hands are fine. No lasting damage." She set the tray on the bed. "Eat something." Ayala looked at the tray, looked at Thessaly. "Where is Lady Vanthorne?" Something shifted behind the healer's careful eyes. "Lady Vanthorne departed the palace last night, following a conversation with the king. She has been asked not to return until certain matters are investigated." "What matters?" Thessaly met her eyes. "The condition you were in when you were found." Ayala said nothing to that. There was nothing to say to it that would not crack something open in her chest, that she did not have the luxury of cracking open right now. "Eat," Thessaly said again, more gently. "Nothing will be decided while you are hungry. The king's instructions were very clear on this point." "The king's instructions?" Ayala repeated, and she could hear the edge in her own voice, the careful sharpness she used when she needed to establish the terms of something before someone else established them for her. "Does the king make a habit of giving instructions about women he brought in from the cold?" Thessaly looked at her for a long moment. Then, with the careful precision of someone laying down a very significant card, "No, he does not." She did not see him that day. She ate. She slept again, which she had not intended, but apparently needed badly enough that her body simply decided for her. She woke in the afternoon to find that new clothes had been left. Real ones, good wool in deep blue and silver, not the threadbare things she had been wearing for months. She dressed slowly, with the suspicious deliberateness of someone who understood that clothes could be a cage as easily as a gift, and then she sat by the window and watched the palace courtyard below. The court was already talking. She could tell from the way people moved through the yard, in clusters, heads bent, conversations that stopped when certain people walked past. She had spent 15 years reading rooms from the outside, and she knew the particular quality of a scandal in motion, the way it spread through a space like a stone dropped in still water. She was the stone. When the knock came at her door that evening, she had been expecting it for an hour. She said, "Come in," and he came in, and the room immediately felt half the size it had been before. He had changed from the night before. Still black, but formal now, the kind of clothes that said, "I am not here as a private person, but as the Alpha King of Valdoria, so choose your words accordingly." He carried nothing. He left the door open behind him, which she appreciated even as she wondered if he had done it intentionally, a deliberate signal that she could leave if she wished, that she was not contained. He stopped several feet away from her. She stood. Not because she had to, but because sitting while he stood felt like ceding ground she was not prepared to cede. "I have some questions," she said. Something moved through his eyes. It might have been amusement, buried very deep under several layers of careful control. "As do I," he said. "You may go first." She had not expected that. She filed it away. "Am I a prisoner?" she asked. "No." "Am I a guest?" "Yes. Guests can leave." He looked at her steadily. "Yes. Then I can leave." "Yes," he said. "If that is what you truly wish, you may walk out of this room, out of this palace, and go wherever you choose. I will not stop you." He paused, just a breath. "I would ask that you tell me where you intend to go, so that I can ensure you arrive safely, but I would not stop you." She held his gaze. "And if I have nowhere to go?" "Then," he said, with the careful weight of a man who had been thinking about exactly how to say this for the better part of a day, "you may stay here, in this room, as my guest, for as long as you need, with no conditions attached." "There are always conditions," she said. "Not this time." She studied him. She was good at reading people. She had to be. Survival had required it. And she had spent years cataloging the particular ways powerful people lied, the small tells, the micro-expressions, the places where the mask slipped and the thing underneath showed through. She looked for all of those things in Caius Blackmere's face and found nothing. Not emptiness, not the blankness of someone who had simply learned to hide better than she could detect. Something else. Something that looked improbably like honesty. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "I know enough," he said. "What do you know?" He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that felt deliberate rather than empty. Then, "I know that you were left in the cold by someone who was supposed to protect you, and that you sat in the snow rather than ask for help, because you have learned that asking for help costs more than you can afford to spend. I know that when I put my cloak around your shoulders, you flinched before you accepted it, which means that things given to you usually come with debts attached. I know that you are calculating the angles of this conversation right now, trying to find the place where I am lying, because everyone lies, and the only question is what the lie is for." She said nothing. "I also know," he said, quieter now, the words careful and precise as a blade, "that the moment I walked into the feast hall last night, I could smell nothing in that entire room except you." The silence that followed had weight. She understood what he was telling her. Every wolf in Valdoria would have understood what he was telling her. She had just never, in her most private and most dangerous thoughts, imagined that it would be her he was telling it to. The prophecy, she said, because she needed something between her and the thing he had just said. Has nothing to do with it, he said. The bond is not the prophecy. The bond simply is. I could not choose it any more than you could. I'm not, she began. I know what you're going to say, he said. You're going to say that you are no one, that you are a ward of a minor house with no title and no standing and nothing to offer a king. And I am going to ask you to save that argument for someone it will work on, because it will not work on me. He let that settle. I know who your parents were. She went very still. House Vance, he said. Not fallen, destroyed, deliberately, by someone who wanted what your family carried and knew she could not take it cleanly while your parents lived. The fireplace crackled. Outside, wind moved through the courtyard. You knew them? She asked, and hated how young her voice sounded. My father did, he said. I have been looking for their daughter for 2 years. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the vast bed in the warm room and stared at the ceiling and turned over what he had told her the way you turn over a stone, expecting to find something unpleasant underneath, and instead find something you were not prepared for. He had told her about House Vance, what they had carried, what it meant, what Lady Vanthorne had spent 15 years suppressing. He had told her carefully, without drama, with the flat factual precision of a man who understood that she needed information more than comfort. He had told her, and then he had said goodnight, and he had left. She had half expected something else. She was ashamed of the half expectation, ashamed and furious at herself for being ashamed, because that shame was itself something Lady Vanthorne had installed, a reflexive flinching, an anticipation of transaction, and she was not going to let that woman reach her here from across the palace. She pressed her palm flat to her sternum and breathed. There was something there. She had noticed it for the first time when he had helped her up from the snow, a warmth that was not physical, a low, steady pulse beneath her ribs like a second heartbeat that was not hers. She had filed it away under things to think about later, but lying alone in the quiet, she could feel it more clearly, a thread, invisible and insistent, connecting her to somewhere else in the palace. She could feel it the way you feel the pull of a river current when you are standing in still water. Present, patient, waiting. She pressed harder. The warmth flared in response, and from somewhere across the palace she felt, and this was the part she could not explain, the part that made no sense, the part she would have dismissed as fever dreaming if she had not been so sharply awake. She felt him register her. She felt him startle into wakefulness, felt the sudden sharp focus of his awareness, and then, like a hand cupped around a candle flame, she felt him settle. Like she had told him she was all right, without words, across a stone palace in the dead of winter. She pulled her hand away from her chest. Lay there. Then, very quietly, against every survival instinct she had ever developed. Remarkable, she said to the ceiling. The morning brought the court. She had known it would. Caius had warned her, in that flat, careful way of his, that certain people would want certain things, and that she did not have to give them anything, but that it might be useful to be seen. She had understood what he meant. Seen. Not displayed. Seen. allowed to exist in space where people could observe her and draw their own conclusions. She dressed in the blue wool. She let Thessaly braid her hair. She drank the tea Thessaly pressed on her, and ate the entire contents of the breakfast tray because she was genuinely hungry for the first time in months, and the sensation of eating until she was actually full was strange enough that she slowed down halfway through just to feel it properly. "The council meets at mid-morning," Thessaly said, watching her with those kind, sharp eyes. "The king has invited you to observe." "Observe," she said. "From the gallery," Thessaly said. "You would not be required to speak." She thought about it. "What would I be required to do?" "Simply be present," Thessaly said. "It is enough." She did not ask why. She understood why. She had spent 15 years invisible. She understood, from the other side, exactly how powerful visibility could be. She said she would go. The council chamber was circular, black marble with silver veins running through it like rivers, a crescent table at its center, with 7 seats filled by 7 pack alphas, who all carried the specific quality of men accustomed to being the most significant presence in any room they entered. She watched from the gallery above, hands folded on the railing, perfectly still. Caius sat at the head of the crescent. He had not looked up when she entered the gallery. She knew, in some way she could not yet articulate but was rapidly learning to trust, that he knew exactly where she was. The bond between them pulsed with a low, steady warmth, like something that had been cold for a very long time, finally finding a fire. The council was discussing Lady Vanthorne. She had expected that too. What she had not expected was the precision of it, the evidence that was laid out, document by document, with the methodical patience of people who had been building a case for months. The properties transferred from House Vance on the night her parents died. The witnesses who had been paid and then had inconveniently died of unrelated causes. The ward registration, filed 2 weeks after her parents' death, which placed her so firmly in Lady Vanthorne's custody that unwinding it would require a direct royal decree. A direct royal decree, it turned out, had been prepared. Lord Aldrich, at the far end of the crescent table, was the one who said what everyone was thinking. His voice carried the particular quality of a man who believed himself to be speaking plain sense in the face of political sentiment, which was his primary flaw and his only quality in equal measure. "With respect, Your Majesty," he said, and his voice dripped with exactly enough deference to be insulting. "The girl's parentage does not change her standing. House Vance has been stripped. Whatever she carried before, she carries nothing now that obligates this council to—" "Her name," Caius said, "is Aella." The chamber went very quiet. "You will use it," he said, still in that low voice, the voice that did not need to rise to fill every corner of the room. "When you refer to her in my presence—" Lord Aldrich's lips thinned. "My apologies. Aella's standing does not—" "Her standing," Caius said, "is whatever I say it is. That is the prerogative of the throne. I trust we all still understand how the throne works." No one answered. No one was going to answer that. From the gallery, she watched Lord Aldrich's face go through several careful recalibrations and arrive at something that was not quite acceptance, but was the nearest functional thing to it that someone of his particular character could manage. She watched the other 6 counselors watch Caius, and she read in their collective posture something she had not expected. Not resentment, or not only resentment. Something closer to relief. Like men who had been waiting for someone to finally say a clear, true thing and had given up expecting it. She watched Caius sit at the head of that crescent table and not look at her once, which was itself a kind of looking. It was after the council session that the first thing happened. She was walking back from the gallery through one of the servant corridors, force of habit. The servant corridors were faster, and she knew how to navigate them. When she heard voices from the passage ahead, she stopped. She was good at stopping, at making herself small and still in a shadowed doorway. 2 voices, women. One of them she did not recognize. The other, she did. Lady Vanthorne had not apparently departed the palace entirely. She listened. She was very good at listening. She stood in the shadowed doorway, and she listened to Lady Vanthorne tell someone whose voice she did not recognize about a binding, about something that had been done to a child of 3, about power that had been locked away for 15 years and what that power was worth and who would pay most handsomely for access to it. She stood very still and felt the thing beneath her ribs that she had noticed for the first time the night before. It was not a heartbeat. It was not a bond, though it ran alongside the bond the way a river runs alongside its bank. It was something older than that, something she had been carrying for so long without knowing what it was that she had categorized it as simply herself, as simply the particular quality of existing in the world, the way her eyes were brown and her hands were steady, and she always felt somehow just outside of everything, like a candle flame in a glass, burning but contained. She had been contained. She understood that now, standing in a shadowed doorway, listening to the woman who had done it, explain the mechanics of the containment to someone she was trying to sell it to. She stepped out of the shadow. Lady Vanthorne turned. For one fraction of a second, something behind those careful eyes flickered. Not fear exactly, but the thing that comes before fear. The moment the prey animal realizes it has been the one being watched all along. "Dear girl," Lady Vanthorne said, recovering, smoothing her expression back into the composed mask Ella had grown up studying. "You look well. The king's hospitality seems to agree with you." "Tell me," Ella said, "what was done to me? I don't know what you—" "Tell me," she said again, "and I will not repeat this conversation to the king. Do not tell me, and I will repeat it word for word, and then you will not have the opportunity to run again." Lady Vanthorne looked at her for a long moment. Then, with the particular quality of a woman who has been caught at something, but still believes herself the superior intelligence in the room. "It was necessary. What you carry, what your mother gave you, it would have torn you apart. I simply ensured you survived long enough to be useful." "Useful to you?" she said. "To both of us," Lady Vanthorne said. "Everything I did to ensure you lived." She had been prepared for many things. She had not been prepared for the woman to actually believe that. "Where is the binding?" she said. A pause. "It is not a thing you can remove by asking." "Where is it?" Lady Vanthorne's eyes dropped involuntarily to her left hip. She reached up and touched the place on her neck where the bond mark would be if the bond had been completed, and she felt the thread of connection to Kaya's pulse, warm and immediate, and she thought very clearly, "I need you." She did not know if that was how it worked. She had known about the bond for less than a day. She simply pressed the thought against the thread and pushed, the way you push against a door to test whether it's locked, and felt it travel. 40 seconds later, she heard footsteps in the corridor. What happened after was not, properly speaking, a confrontation. It was more that Caius arrived, took in the scene, and the scene reorganized itself around his presence the way rooms do when the most dangerous thing in them decides to stop pretending. Lady Vanthorne tried to leave. She was prevented from leaving. She tried 2 other things Ella did not fully track, because she was watching Caius's face instead, watching him listen to what she told him, watching the way his expression did not change, but his eyes did. That slow, terrible gold, burning hotter and hotter, behind the controlled surface. He said 4 words to the guards. "Escort her to custody," Lady Vanthorne said, with the absolute composure of a woman who has been catastrophically miscalculating for 15 years. "You have no grounds. Conspiracy against House Vance," he said. "Abuse of wardship. And now—" His eyes moved to Aella, measuring, asking. "Illegal power binding of a royal blood lineage." "She is not of royal blood," Lady Vanthorne said. "She carries a luminary inheritance," Caius said, "which predates every noble house in this realm, including mine. That is not something you bind without authorization. That is not something you bind at all." He looked at Lady Vanthorne with something that was beyond contempt, something colder and more final. "The council will hear the evidence tomorrow. Tonight, you are a guest of the palace's lower cells." Lady Vanthorne was taken away. The corridor was quiet. Aella stood very still and felt the binding at her hip like a splinter she had never known was there until someone named it. Old, tight, precise. The work of someone who had known exactly what she was doing, who had installed it so carefully that it had felt like the edges of herself rather than a cage around herself. "Can it be removed?" she asked. "Thessaly will know how," Caius said. He was watching her with that unreadable attentiveness, that quality of complete focus that she was learning was simply what he was like, that it was not performance or calculation, but simply the way he moved through the world. "It will take time. It cannot be forced or it may damage what it was meant to contain," she said. "Yes." She nodded, tucked that information away. It could wait. She had learned patience the way some people learn languages, through absolute necessity, until it became unconscious. "I called to you," she said. "I heard you," he said. A pause, shorter than the others. "I didn't know it would work," she said. "It will always work," he said, and then, quieter, with the careful precision of a man who was saying the true thing and knew it. "Whatever you need, wherever you are, I will hear you." She looked at him in the cold light of the servant corridor, this king who had given her his cloak and left her door open and said her name in a council chamber like it was a declaration of war, and she felt the thing beneath her ribs pulse steady and warm, and she thought, with the measured carefulness of someone who had been burned by hope before, this might be real. She was not ready to say that out loud yet, but she filed it away somewhere close, somewhere she could reach it. The night passed slowly. She could feel him across the palace, that low, steady warmth, banked but present, pulsing with a patience that matched her own. She fell asleep sometime past midnight and dreamed of silver light, of her own hands glowing in a darkness that was not frightening but vast, of something inside her chest uncurling like a plant growing toward a window. She woke at dawn, and something had changed. She lay there for a moment, aware of it before she had words for it, the way you are sometimes aware of a shift in weather before you can identify what has shifted. Then she pressed her palm to her sternum, the way she had the night before, and felt more, warmer, closer. The thread between her and Caius had thickened overnight, had moved from a thread to something more like a rope, and it hummed with something that was not just his presence, but his intent, his attention, his particular quality of focus that she was starting to understand. Was not intimidation, but protection. She got up. She dressed. She braided her own hair because Thessaly had not come yet, and she preferred it anyway, preferred the small autonomy of managing her own appearance. She stood at the window and watched dawn break over Valdoria, light coming in shades of rose and gold across the black stone towers, and she let herself feel, for the first time in as long as she could remember, that the light was for her too. That was when the door opened without a knock. She turned. It was not Caius. It was not Thessaly. It was a man she had not seen before. Older, silver-streaked dark hair, face weathered by years of something harder than politics, eyes kind despite their sharpness. He stopped in the doorway and looked at her, and then, without preamble, without explanation, with the absolute certainty of a man who had been waiting for this exact moment for a very long time, he went down on one knee. "My name is Brennan," he said. "I am First Beta to the Alpha King of Valdoria, and I have been searching for you for 2 years, my lady." She stared at him. "There are others outside who would do the same," he said, "if you would permit it. The household guard, the royal healers, people who served your parents and have been waiting for the chance to serve their daughter." He looked up at her with those weathered, kind eyes. "The court watched you dragged from the feast hall last night. They watched what was done to you. And this morning, they know what the king said in council. They know what he is to you and what you are to him." He paused. "They are waiting to follow your lead, my lady, if you give them one." She was quiet for a long moment. "I am not a lady," she said. "Not officially. Not yet." "You are," Brennan said simply. "Exactly what you are. The rest is paperwork." She looked at him. She looked at the door behind him, which was standing open, morning light falling through it into the corridor beyond, and she could see the edge of the corridor, the edge of the world beyond this room. And she thought about all the years of standing along walls and making herself invisible and learning to want nothing, learning to hope for nothing, because hope was the most dangerous thing she knew. She thought about sitting in the snow. She thought about a cloak settling over her shoulders. She said, "Help him up." Brennan looked at her. "Tell him to stand," she said. "I do not need people on their knees. I need people who will stand with me." Something in Brennan's weathered face shifted, opened, like a door she hadn't known was closed. He rose. He looked at her with something that was, improbably, close to pride. The particular pride of a man who had served faithfully for a long time and was finally certain he had done the right thing. "As my lady commands," he said. "Not a command," she said. "A preference." She straightened. "Let's go." She walked out into the corridor, and the household guard was there, 12 of them, standing at precise intervals along the stone passage. And as she stepped out, they turned to face her, and one by one, beginning with the nearest and moving down the line like a wave, they bowed. Not the small bow of courtesy, the low bow of recognition, the bow that meant something. She kept walking. The courtyard was filled with morning light and the specific busy quality of a palace coming awake, servants crossing with purpose, stable hands leading horses, kitchen staff carrying baskets from the market wagons. She walked through it, Brennan at her shoulder, and the people in the courtyard turned to watch her, and she met every gaze that found hers, and she did not look away. She had spent 15 years making herself invisible. She was done with that. Caius was waiting at the far end of the courtyard, standing at the top of the stairs that led to the main hall, and he saw her coming from across the full width of the cobblestones, and something in his face, that controlled, careful, thoroughly impenetrable face, moved, just slightly, just enough. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He came down them, unhurried, deliberate, until he was standing one step above her, and they were the same height, and he looked at her with those pale gold eyes, and she felt the bond between them warm to something close to incandescent. "You slept," he said. "Eventually," she said. "Thessaly would like to begin the binding removal today, if you are ready." "I am," she said. He held out his hand, palm up, the gesture so simple and so careful that it managed to be both entirely non-commanding and entirely sincere. An offer, nothing more. She looked at it, then she placed her hand in his. The warmth that moved through her was not just the bond. It was something older, something deeper. The thing in her chest that had been coiled and contained for 15 years, stirring in its sleep, turning toward the light, pressing against the edges of the cage that had held it. Not breaking free, not yet, but breathing, for the first time in as long as she could remember, simply breathing. He closed his hand around hers, carefully, like he was holding something that mattered. The courtyard watched. And at the top of the stairs, Brennan cleared his throat and said, at a volume precisely calculated to carry, "The household awaits, my lord, my lady." My lady. She did not correct him this time. She walked up the stairs, her hand in the hand of the Alpha King of Valdoria, the morning light falling across the black stone palace in shades of rose and gold, and she thought about the night before. The cold, the silk dress, the snow, the humiliation, the certainty that she was invisible and would always be invisible. And she thought about how much had changed in the space of one darkness and one dawn. And she thought, not enough. Not nearly enough. She had a binding to remove, and a house to reclaim, and a guardian to see face justice, and a power inside her chest that had been sleeping for 15 years and was now, slowly, extraordinarily, beginning to wake. She was not finished. She was, for the first time in 15 years, only beginning. The council chamber filled at mid-morning. She had not intended to attend. She had spent 2 hours with Thessaly, the royal healer's careful hands mapping the binding at her hip with a focused thoroughness that was equal parts medical examination and something older, something that felt like cartography, like someone tracing the shoreline of a country they had been told did not exist. Thessaly did not rush. She did not speak much. But once, near the end, she had looked up at Ayala with those weathered kind eyes and said, very quietly, "Your mother would have been proud. Whatever she did to protect you, she did it because she believed you were worth protecting." Ayala had not cried. She did not have the habit of crying. But she had put her hand over Thessaly's briefly and pressed, and Thessaly had understood. They were going to remove the binding carefully, over 3 days, in measured stages that would allow the power beneath it to breathe into the freedom gradually, rather than all at once. This was, Thessaly had explained, both safer for Ayala and safer for the palace, and she had said it with the particular dry quality of someone making a mild understatement, which Ayala had appreciated. She had not intended to attend the council. Then Brennan had come to find her. "Lady Vanthorne's case is being heard now," he said. "There is someone presenting evidence on your behalf. Someone who came forward this morning of their own will." She had gone to the gallery. The someone was a woman she did not recognize, dressed in plain servant's clothes, gray at her temples, hands folded in her lap with the careful stillness of someone who has been frightened for a long time and has finally decided that the thing on the other side of the fear is worth reaching for. She gave her testimony in a clear, flat voice. She named dates and amounts and specific events. She described things that had happened in Lady Vanthorne's household with the specificity of an eyewitness, because she was an eyewitness. She had been Lady Vanthorne's personal attendant for 11 years, And she had seen everything, and she had stayed silent because silence was the price of survival. And she had come forward today because the Alpha King's pronouncement in council yesterday had told her that the price of survival had changed. Lord Aldrich tried twice to undermine her testimony. Caius let him try, and then disposed of each attempt with a concision that was almost gentle, the way a very large, very patient predator is gentle when it has already won and is simply tidying up. Lady Vanthorne, when she was brought in to hear the testimony, looked at Aella in the gallery exactly once. Aella met her eyes and held them. Lady Vanthorne looked away first. The council deliberated for 20 minutes. The verdict was not a surprise to anyone who had been paying attention to the morning. Lady Vanthorne's properties were formally seized pending full investigation. Her wardship of Aella of House Vance was retroactively dissolved. The decrees restoring House Vance, stripped, it was now formally noted on the record, on fabricated grounds, were signed by Caius in front of all 7 pack alphas, each seal pressed into black wax, the documents handed to the court recorder, with the unhurried finality of something that had been waiting 15 years for this particular moment. Aella watched from the gallery. She felt the moment the last seal was pressed as a vibration in the bond. Caius's satisfaction, low and deep and absolutely controlled, leaking through the connection between them like heat from a fire that was burning very steadily and had been burning for a long time and was not going to go out. She put her hands flat on the gallery railing and breathed. Below, Caius looked up, straight to her, unerringly, the way he always seemed to find her across any space, as if the distance between them was simply a formality. He looked at her with those pale gold eyes, and she felt the bond pulse warm between them. And she thought about everything that had happened in the span of one night and one morning. And she thought about the woman who had just given her testimony in a clear, flat voice because she had decided the cost of silence had become too high. She thought about all the things that had been suppressed and contained and locked away and silenced. She thought about what breathing felt like when you had been holding your breath for 15 years. She had a long way to go. She knew that there was a binding that still needed careful dismantling and a power she did not yet know how to use, and a court she would need to learn to navigate, and a king who was looking at her like she was the answer to a question he had forgotten he was asking. There was trust she did not yet know how to give, and walls she had built so carefully over so many years that she could not yet see where they ended and she began. But she was standing in the morning light above a council chamber where 7 pack alphas had just signed their names to the restoration of her house. And the most powerful wolf in Valdoria was looking at her from below with that particular quality of gold-eyed attention that she was learning to recognize as the truest version of him. The version that existed beneath all the control and the power and the careful deliberateness. The version that had gone into the cold last night and put a cloak around a girl sitting in the snow because it was the right thing to do. And from somewhere in her chest, in the place where the binding sat, and the power waited, and the bond hummed its low, steady warmth, something finally, quietly, put down its guard. Not all of it. She was not built for all at once, but some of it. Enough. Enough to walk down from the gallery into the light. She turned from the railing. She walked to the door. She went down the stairs into the main hall of the Palace of Valdoria, and the guards at the bottom of the stairs turned at the sound of her footsteps, and she met their eyes, and they bowed. She did not stop walking. She walked through the hall, and the people in it turned and bowed, one after another, like a wave moving through water, like the morning she had walked through the courtyard but larger now, more certain, carrying the weight of the council's seals and the servant's testimony, and Brennan's weathered kind eyes saying the household awaits, my lady. She walked to where Caius was waiting at the entrance to the hall. He did not bow. He was the Alpha King of Valdoria. He did not bow to anyone, but the way he looked at her when she reached him, the way his gold eyes held hers with that low, burning patience, the way the bond between them sang when she was close, the way his voice, when he finally spoke, was quieter than everything around them, meant only for her, felt like something better than a bow. The council wishes to speak with you, he said, when you are ready. I know, she said. You don't have to today. I know, she said again. She looked at him. She thought about walls, and about what it cost to put them down, and about the particular quality of warmth in the thing beneath her ribs that had never been hers alone, that had been reaching for him as long as she had been alive, waiting for her to stop running long enough to feel it. Walk with me first. He said nothing. He fell into step beside her. They walked out of the great hall into the palace gardens, where moonflowers were closing their petals against the morning light, and an ancient oak stood at the garden's heart, enormous and permanent and utterly indifferent to the politics and the prophecies and the 15 years of carefully arranged suffering that had brought them both to this morning. The snow from the night before still lay in the hollows of the garden, bright and undisturbed, catching the light. She stopped at the base of the oak. She put her hand against the bark and felt the solidity of it, the absolute unhurried permanence of something that had been standing here through every crisis this palace had ever produced, and would still be standing long after everyone in it was gone. I am afraid, she said. She had not intended to say it. She was not built for saying things like that. But it was true, and she was very tired of managing the truth, of keeping it at a careful distance. He stood beside her, not touching, not pressing. I know, he said. I don't know how to do this, she said. Neither do I, he said. I have commanded armies. I have ended 3 wars and outlasted 2 assassination attempts and held a kingdom together through a council of 7 people who have been trying to make my life difficult since I was 19. But I do not know how to do this. A pause. I have not had practice at it. She looked at him. You found me, she said. You came out in the cold after me? Yes, he said. You knew from the moment you walked into the hall, she said. Yes, he said. And you left the door open. You gave me the choice. You said I could leave. Yes, he said. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Then, because the prophecy does not matter. The bond does not matter, or not in the way you mean. I would not trap something that wished to be free simply because the moon goddess decreed we belonged together. If you left, I would have found a way to live with it. He paused, and she could feel through the bond the specific quality of what it cost him to say the next part. The way a man who never speaks of difficult things pays double the price when he finally does. But I would not have been whole. I have never been whole. I have been functional, sufficient. And then I walked into that hall, and I felt you before I saw you, and I understood, for the first time in my life, what the difference was. She was very still. I left the door open, he said, because I needed you to choose, not because the bond chose, not because the prophecy required it, because you chose, freely, with everything you know about what it means to trust someone and how often that trust is used against you. He looked at her. I need that to be real. She pressed her back against the oak tree and looked at the man who had given her his cloak in the snow, who had spoken her name in a council chamber like a declaration, who was standing in a winter garden, telling her he needed her choice to be real. And she felt the bond between them hum with a warmth so steady and so deep that it was no longer something she was observing, but something she was simply inside. "Then it is," she said, "real." The morning light moved across the garden. The ancient oak stood at her back, enormous and permanent. Somewhere in the palace behind them, Brennan was no doubt handling 17 urgent things with practiced competence, and Thessaly was preparing the careful work of the binding removal, and the council was waiting with their questions and their politics and their carefully arranged positions, and Lady Vanthorne was in a cell, and the documents restoring House Vance were signed and sealed and entered into the court record. All of that was real too. But this was the truest thing. The girl who had sat in the snow last night, invisible and cold and entirely alone, putting her hand in the hand of the king who had come out after her and saying, "Real." "Ready?" he said. She pushed off from the oak. She straightened. She took one breath, slow and complete, and felt the thing in her chest that had been sleeping for 15 years turn fully toward the light, press against the edges of its containment, warm and patient and absolutely certain. "Yes," she said, and she walked back into the palace.